Hey guys, it's Mr. Drake. We've already talked a little bit over the course of Unit 2, if you're one of my students, about the history of political parties in the United States and how different party systems emerged over the years. What we're going to talk about today in this video are specific elections that have led to a realignment of the political fabric of the United States. So by the end of this video, you should be able to define what party realignment is and explain why these 5 elections between 1800 and 1932 are considered to be realigning elections. Also, there are 3 other elections we're going to look at, 1968, 1980, and 2008, and discuss why they might be considered realigning elections, although honestly, in the context of history, it's too early to really tell for sure. Also be able to define or identify these terms: the populist movement, New Deal coalition, the Southern strategy, and the Reagan Revolution. So before we get into each election one by one, let's talk about what a realigning election is. You'll often hear it referred to as a party realignment. Those are really synonymous terms. But party realignment occurs when the coalition or the group, population, whatever, that supports a political party in the United States undergoes a big change. So one group that supported Democrats goes to supporting Republicans, for example. That would be a party realignment if it lasts for many, many years. You know, sometimes you will have instances where in one election, just because of various factors in the country, the economy or whatever, there's a big wave and a group that normally wouldn't vote Republican votes Republican in this one election, but then it goes back to normal the next time around. Party realignments, by definition, are lasting changes in who supports what party. This is not to be confused with de-alignment, which is a term you'll see every once in a while. De-alignment is when voters abandon one party and then don't really identify with another one. We're not really going to talk about that too much, but you will see that term occasionally in political science, so just know what de-alignment means. It's pretty self-explanatory. Throughout American history, most realigning elections have occurred when the major parties in the country changed. This is especially true early in America's history, as you'll see as we look through these individual elections and why they are realigning elections. So let's go ahead and get started. The first major realignment occurs in 1800 when Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party beats President John Adams, who was a Federalist. And this is the first time that political power had been wrested away from the Federalists and people in favor of a very strong national government. And you begin to see political power shift from New England, which is where Adams and the Federalists had most of their base, to the South and the West. Thomas Jefferson was from Virginia. He was a farmer, so he had the support of the southern states and the western states that were more agrarian. This is also the first time that the nation's capital had been located in the South instead of being located in New York or Philadelphia. So this is a major sea change in American politics here. And the next 4 presidents, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, were all members of the Democratic Republican Party. And for part of that time, it was the only party that existed in the United States, the only major party anyway. After about 1815 or so, the Federalists ceased to exist because they had opposed the War of 1812, and then when America ended up not losing the War of 1812, the Federalists came off as looking unpatriotic and just sort of lost all of their support. It was so, the political culture of the country was so dominated by the Democratic Republicans, in fact, that in 1820, James Monroe ran for president unopposed, ran for re-election that year with no major opponent, and he's the only person other than George Washington to run for president unopposed. But this dominance of the Democratic Republicans would not last because in 1828, Andrew Jackson of the Democratic Party ends up beating the last Democratic Republican president, John Quincy Adams. This is the end of that one-party system I mentioned in the last slide and the beginning of the new two-party system, as the remnants of the National Republicans and other people disaffected and angry with Andrew Jackson formed an opposition party known as the Whigs. And the Democrats and the Whigs were the two major parties in the United States from the early 1830s until the early 1850s. The next major realignment occurs in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln of the new Republican Party beat three other candidates to win the presidency. The Republican Party, as I mentioned in the last video, was primarily made up of former Whigs and just a mishmash of other third parties that had come and gone in the 1840s and 1850s. But the Republican Party ends up gaining staying power, even though it had started off as a third party, because it got the support of everyone pretty much who had supported the Civil War, that being a lot of Northerners and Southern blacks as well. The Democratic Party, though, it's important to note, remained a major political party nationwide throughout the late 1800s, even after the Civil War. And that changes, ... The Northern Democrats defected in 1896. William McKinley defeated William Jennings Bryan that year. William Jennings Bryan was a Democrat, but he was also a member of the populist movement, which had emerged in the 1890s as a movement of farmers in the South and out west. Remember, populists are socially conservative but fiscally liberal and were in favor of government assistance to the poor, especially farmers in those agrarian areas. Northern Democrats did not trust William Jennings Bryan. He focused so much on agrarian issues, they thought he was essentially anti-business and would endanger their livelihoods or their jobs in the big cities of the North and the East. He also alienated Catholics because he was so religious and so fundamentalist in his views, and he almost sounded like a fire and brimstone Southern preacher when he gave his campaign speeches, and just scared the bejesus out of immigrants and Catholics who normally would have supported the Democratic Party but ended up defecting to the Republicans in 1896. So throughout the early 20th century, you see an electoral map that looks pretty much like this, where the South is solidly Democratic and the North and the Northeast are primarily Republican. The Great Depression changes all of that, though. The Republicans had more or less dominated Congress and the presidency for the early 20th century, but then the Great Depression hits in 1929 and shakes everyone's faith in the government and makes everyone distrust and resent Herbert Hoover, especially, who had been elected president in 1828, promising to keep up the prosperity. And so Franklin Roosevelt took advantage of this anger and resentment and despair and cobbled together a group of voters that made very strange bedfellows. He got the support of African Americans in the North and essentially promised them more prosperity and more opportunity if he were to be elected. He got Jews in the North who primarily had been Republican before, and he began to get the support of Southern whites, which of course Democrats had traditionally gotten. So it's a very, very loose, tenuous coalition there. It's a little shaky. African Americans and Southern whites, not two people that you would, or not two groups you would typically think would support the same candidate, but Roosevelt was able to appeal to all of them. This is called the New Deal Coalition, which held for the next 30 years. And you can see right there the difference in the electoral map between 1928 and 1932, when Roosevelt just wins the presidency in a wave election. 1932 is often thought of as being the last major realigning election. There are several elections since, though, that look like realigning elections, but again, in the context of American history, it might be a little too early to determine for sure if they are true realignments. One of those is 1968, when Richard Nixon beat Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic candidate for the presidency, and this was the end of Democratic dominance of the South. The South remained solidly Democratic until really the 1960s, when Democrats in larger numbers began to support advances in civil rights, especially John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And it's notable that Lyndon Johnson is a white Democrat from Texas with a Southern twang who signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which angered most Southern Democrats. So the Republicans decided to sort of try to come in and gobble up those voters by exploiting those racial tensions. And it's known as the Republicans' Southern strategy, where they heavily focused on Southern white voters in 64 and 68 elections and were able to sort of draw them away from the Democratic Party. And this was the end of the Democratic Party's complete chokehold on the South. 1980 is often called the Reagan Revolution. This is the rebirth of conservatism when Ronald Reagan, who was extremely conservative, defeated President Jimmy Carter. The 60s and 70s were a very tumultuous time in America with a lot of civil rights advances and social liberalism, the beginning of the women's liberation movement. The gay rights movement starts in the 1970s. So, things were not looking very good for conservatives, and they were pretty down throughout the late 60s and 1970s. Even though Ronald Reagan was a Republican president, he was actually fairly moderate. But Ronald Reagan is credited with bringing this big conservative movement back, and ends up winning election in landslides in 1980 and 1984. Finally, 2008, this one's really too early to tell, but when Obama defeated McCain, it marked the end of the complete Republican chokehold on the southern United States. That had been broken very briefly by Bill Clinton, who won a lot of southern states in 1992 and 1996, since he was a southern governor from Arkansas. But with except for those two, really the Republicans had dominated presidential politics, at least in the South. Now, a lot of southern congressmen are still Republicans and everything like that, but for the first time in 40 years, the Republicans and Democrats are somewhat competitive with each other in the South, with Obama winning the previously heavily Republican states of Virginia and North Carolina in 2008, and he also won Virginia again in 2012. That will do it for today. Make sure you're keeping up with your reading, and be sure to ask if you have any questions. Cheers.